June 3, 1991. Costa Mesa, California. Just after 2 in the morning. A silver-blue Honda Accord sits on the shoulder of southbound State Route 73, hazard lights blinking in the dark. The right rear tire is flat. The engine is off. The door is unlocked. A woman's purse is on the seat. The keys are in the ignition. The car is empty. 23-year-old Denise Huber had been driving home from a Morrissey concert at the Great Western Forum in Inglewood. She was 20 minutes from the Newport Beach house she shared with her parents. She had pulled over when the tire blew, the way anyone would. She was wearing heels from the concert, but the nearest call box was close. The nearest gas station was close. She was close to home in every way that should have mattered. But someone stopped to help. And for 3 years, nobody knew what had happened after that. Her family woke up the next morning to an empty bedroom. Her car sat on the freeway shoulder with the hazard lights still draining the battery. The police searched. The family searched. Her parents put a 6x30-foot banner on the roof of an apartment building overlooking the freeway. It read, "Have you seen her?" It stayed up for years. They did not find Denise. Not that year. Not the year after that. What they eventually found, 3 years later in the Arizona desert, was worse than anything her family had allowed themselves to imagine. Before we go into this story, let us know where you are watching from. And if you want more cases like this, subscribe, because what was inside that moving truck in Arizona is one of the most disturbing things this case produced, and it raises a question about the man who did it that investigators are still trying to answer. To understand what happened to Denise Huber, you need to understand the world she came from. Because the distance between her life and what was done to it is the kind of distance that makes this case impossible to set down. Denise Annette Huber was 23 years old in June of 1991. She had grown up in Newport Beach, California, in one of the more comfortable corners of Orange County, the kind of Southern California community where the summers are long, the beaches are close, and the lives people build there have a quality of ease that outsiders sometimes mistake for simplicity. Her parents, Dennis and Ione Huber, had moved to California from South Dakota decades earlier and built a quiet, stable life. Denise was their only child. She had just graduated from the University of California, Irvine, with a degree in social sciences. She was working at a local restaurant, living at home while she saved money and figured out the shape of the next chapter. 23 years old, a new degree, a city full of possibility in front of her. Her parents described her later as someone who was enjoying life and getting ready to really settle down, someone on the edge of everything opening up. On the evening of June 2, 1991, Denise went to a Morrissey concert at the Great Western Forum in Inglewood with a work friend named Rob Calvert. It was a Sunday night, the kind of summer evening that stays warm even after dark in Southern California. Rob hoped, by his own later account, that the evening might become something more. For Denise, it was a night out with a friend, music she loved, nothing more complicated than that. The concert ended. Rob went home. Denise got in her Honda Accord and started south on the 405, then connected to State Route 73 toward Newport Beach. She was 20 minutes from home. Somewhere on that stretch of highway, the right rear tire blew. She pulled over to the shoulder. She turned on the hazard lights. And at some point after that, on a freeway shoulder at 2 in the morning wearing concert clothes and heels, she either started walking toward help or accepted an offer of help from someone who stopped. A family friend driving that same stretch of highway at approximately 2 in the morning saw Denise's car on the shoulder. He recognized it. He assumed she had already found help and driven off with someone else, and he continued on. By the time her parents woke up in the morning and realized she had not come home, and drove to the freeway to look, the car was still there. The hazard lights had drained the battery completely. The car had been sitting on that shoulder for hours with nobody inside it. The police were called. K-9 units tracked Denise's scent 75 yards from the car along the freeway shoulder. Then the scent simply stopped. As if she had stepped into a vehicle at that point and been driven away. There was nothing else. No witnesses who had seen her get into a car. No one who had seen a struggle. No physical evidence on or near the vehicle that indicated exactly what had happened. She was gone in the space between one footstep and the next. The investigation that followed was large and sustained. The Orange County Sheriff's Department and the Costa Mesa Police Department both worked the case. Helicopters flew the area. Cadaver dogs searched the surrounding land. The family put up the banner, the 6-by-30-foot banner on the apartment building overlooking the freeway, with Denise's photograph and the phone number and the words, "Have you seen her?" Tips came in. They were followed up. None of them led anywhere. The case went cold. For 3 years, Denise Huber's disappearance was one of the most visible unsolved cases in Orange County. Her parents refused to pack up her room. They refused to stop asking questions. Dennis and Ione Huber did what every family in their position does, which is to keep going, keep asking, keep the case alive in any way available to them, because the alternative to staying in motion was to accept an answer they did not have and could not live with. Meanwhile, across the county, a 34-year-old paint contractor named John Joseph Famalaro was going about his business. Famalaro had been operating a painting business in Orange County in the summer of 1991. He rented a warehouse unit in the area as a workspace. He was, by outward appearance, an unremarkable working man, the kind of person who passes through the edges of other people's lives without leaving any impression. In the summer of 1991, at some point in the early hours of June 3, he had been on State Route 73. Investigators would later conclude that Famalaro drove past Denise Huber's Honda Accord on the shoulder of the freeway, saw a young woman alone with a flat tire, and stopped. What happened in the hours that followed took place, investigators determined, at Famalaro's warehouse unit in Orange County. It is not necessary to describe in detail what he did there. What matters for this story is the decision he made after. Instead of abandoning the crime, instead of running, instead of any of the options that most perpetrators would take, Famalaro put Denise's body into a large chest freezer in his warehouse. He handcuffed her hands behind her back. He sealed the freezer. He kept it. He kept it for 3 years. When Famalaro moved his business from California to Arizona in 1994, he took the freezer with him. He loaded it onto a rented moving truck and drove it across state lines to Prescott Valley, Arizona, where he set up a new life. The freezer came with him. The extension cord that kept it running trailed from the back of the truck. In early July of 1994, a woman named Elaine Canelier was at a swap meet in Prescott Valley, where she and her business partner sold paint supplies. She had met a man named John at the swap meet a few months earlier, a newcomer, a painter, someone who had seemed to be establishing himself in the area. They had arranged to pick up some supplies from his property. When Elaine and her partner arrived at his address, something about the rented moving truck parked in the driveway stopped them. It had been sitting there for weeks. It was covered with a tarp. An extension cord ran from somewhere inside the back of it into the house. The whole arrangement seemed, as Elaine would later describe it to investigators, completely out of place. She reported it to police. An officer responded and surveyed the property. The chemicals around the truck initially suggested a possible drug operation. A search warrant was issued. Officers approached the truck and opened the back. They found the freezer. When they cut open the sealed plastic bag inside and peeled it back, they found a body. A young woman, on her knees, head bent down, hands handcuffed behind her back. A piece of cloth had been stuffed into her mouth and duct-taped closed. She had been frozen for 3 years. The investigators working the scene did not know who she was. They transported the remains to the medical examiner's office and began the process of identification. Fingerprints confirmed it. It was Denise Huber. 3 years after a tire blew on State Route 73 and a 23-year-old woman disappeared from a freeway shoulder, her family had the answer they had been waiting for. It was not the answer anyone would have wanted. John Joseph Famalaro was still at the property when police arrived. By witness accounts, he was eerily calm about the presence of law enforcement, cooperative and composed until the questioning turned specifically to the freezer. At that point, he said 4 words, "I have nothing more to say." He requested an attorney and said nothing else. The search of his property produced evidence that made the picture of what he was come together with terrible clarity. Inside a box marked Christmas decorations, investigators found a bloody hammer and a nail puller. They found guns and handcuffs. They found a Los Angeles Sheriff's Department patrol shirt, evidence that strongly suggested Famalaro had used the shirt to appear as a police officer, gaining Denise's trust on the side of the freeway by presenting as someone safe, someone with authority, someone she should get into a vehicle with. They found Denise's purse. her wallet, her identification, her makeup, her car keys, her clothing from the night of the concert. Everything she had been carrying or wearing on the night she disappeared had been kept and stored. And they found something else that illustrated who Famalaro was with a precision that no testimony could match. He had kept newspaper clippings. Multiple issues of the Orange County Register, the local paper, with headlines about Denise Huber's disappearance. He had recorded a television episode of Inside Edition that had featured a story about her case. He had followed the search for her. He had watched her family look for her. He had kept those records alongside her body in the freezer and her belongings in labeled boxes in his house. He had been watching. The whole time. A forensic anthropologist reconstructed Denise's skull and determined that she had been struck more than 30 times in the head, with both a hammer and a crowbar recovered from Famalaro's property. The medical examiner confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. Investigators used luminol at the warehouse unit to map the bloodstains and establish exactly where the attack had taken place. The underground room at the back of Famalaro's basement was searched with cadaver dogs. No additional victims were found. But investigators began reaching out to other agencies, and what came back was a portrait of a man who had been doing this, or attempting to do this, for a long time. A woman in Arizona came forward to say that Famalaro had taken her into the desert and attempted to strangle her. She had fought him off. She had run, and survived, and never reported it because she had not believed anyone would take her seriously. She identified him immediately from a photograph. Other women came forward with accounts of Famalaro restraining them, handcuffing them to furniture without consent, and other behavior that followed the same pattern. A man who had been operating in plain sight for years, hurting people and not being stopped, until the one night he made a mistake and parked his rented truck in a driveway where the right person noticed. John Joseph Famalaro stood trial in 1997 in Orange County Superior Court. He pleaded not guilty. The defense argued that he had suffered severe childhood trauma and mental health difficulties that bore on his culpability. The prosecution presented the physical evidence: the hammer, the freezer, the newspaper clippings, the forensic reconstruction, the DNA, and argued that the sophistication of the crime and the years-long concealment demonstrated a man in full control of what he was doing and what he chose to do with it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They convicted Famalaro of first-degree murder under special circumstances, specifically, that the murder occurred during the commission of a kidnapping and a sexual assault. They sentenced him to death. The California Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and the sentence on appeal. Famalaro has been on death row at San Quentin State Prison ever since. California's ongoing moratorium on executions means he remains alive. His legal team has continued to file appeals. Every one has failed. Dennis Huber, Denise's father, spoke after the verdict in words that described not relief but a particular kind of grief that verdicts cannot touch. He said that Famalaro had taken part of his life away. That Denise was so special and they were so close that that part of him is simply gone. That a man who commits this kind of crime rips something away that no sentence can give back. Dennis and Ione Huber eventually moved back to South Dakota, to the town of Haride where their families were from. They buried Denise there, not far from the home where they settled. Time helps you heal, Ione said. But you never forget it. This case leaves 3 things that are worth carrying. The first is about what a flat tire costs when the wrong person stops. There is a particular cruelty in the mechanics of what happened to Denise Huber on June 3, 1991, because it begins with something so completely ordinary. A tire blows. It happens to millions of people. She pulled over the way she was supposed to. She had the hazard lights on. She was 20 minutes from home. And the window of vulnerability created by that one mechanical failure, a few minutes on a freeway shoulder in the early morning dark, was the only thing that Famalaro needed. There was no recklessness on her part. No bad decision. A flat tire and a man who had been looking for exactly that kind of moment. That is what it took. The second is about the newspaper clippings. Of all the evidence found in Famalaro's house and in that moving truck, the newspaper clippings are the detail that tells you the most about what he was. He had followed the search. He had watched the family look. He had recorded the television segment. He had kept the coverage of Denise's disappearance alongside her body and her belongings, and he had moved all of it across state lines when he relocated. This was not the behavior of someone overwhelmed by what they had done and unable to process it. This was someone who was watching. Someone who found something in the coverage that he wanted to keep, and to revisit, and to take with him. The newspaper clippings are the coldest detail in this entire case. The third is about Dennis and Ione Huber's banner. 6 by 30 feet, mounted on the roof of an apartment building overlooking the freeway where their daughter's car was found. Have you seen her? That banner stayed up while the case went cold. It stayed up while 3 years passed without an answer. It was the physical form of a refusal to accept that Denise had simply vanished without anyone being accountable for it. They did not put it up because they believed the banner would solve the case. They put it up because the alternative was silence, and silence felt like a kind of abandonment that they were not willing to give their daughter. What solved the case, in the end, was not a banner and not a detective and not a database. It was a woman at a swap meet in Arizona who looked at a rented truck covered by a tarp and decided that something was wrong. One person, paying attention, acting on what she noticed, in a parking lot in Prescott Valley. That is what finally brought Denise home. Denise Huber was 23 years old on the morning of June 3, 1991. She had just graduated from college. She had her whole life in front of her in the most literal sense, a career to build, a place to live, everything still ahead and unformed and full of possibility. She had been to a concert that night. She was 20 minutes from home. The hazard lights on her Honda Accord sat blinking on the shoulder of State Route 73 until the battery died. Her parents spent 3 years not knowing. What they eventually learned was that she had been there the entire time, less than 100 miles away, in a freezer in a warehouse, while a man collected newspaper articles about the search and kept them in a box. He is still on death row. If you have watched this far, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if this story stayed with you, share it. Because 30 years later, Denise Huber deserves to be remembered as the person she was, not just the case she became. 34 years after that night, Dennis Huber sat for an interview and said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. He said he thinks about the flat tire constantly. Not with anger. With something quieter and harder than anger. He said he and Ione have spent 3 decades going over what could have been different, what small thing might have changed, what version of that night exists in which Denise makes it home. A different route. A different time. A tire that holds. None of those versions are the one they got. The version they got is the one where a concert ends, and a tire blows, and a man who had been hunting for exactly that kind of moment happened to be on that stretch of road at exactly that hour. No amount of asking what if changes what is. They know that. But the question does not stop asking itself, the way those questions never stop for the people who are left behind. John Famalaro has never offered an explanation for the newspaper clippings. He has never offered an account of what those years meant to him, or what he did with the knowledge of what was in that freezer while Denise's family was plastering her face on banners and driving to police stations and sitting by the phone. His legal team has argued his case through appeals courts and to the California Supreme Court, and the answer has been the same each time. He received a fair trial. The sentence stands. He is still alive because the state of California is still alive to the question of whether it should execute people, and that question remains unresolved. Meanwhile, Dennis and Ione Huber are in South Dakota. Denise is buried not far from where they live now, in the town their family came from, in soil far from the California freeway where she disappeared. They visit. They carry what they carry. And they have said, simply and without drama, that they are grateful he is locked up and that he will never be able to do this to anyone else. That is what justice looks like from where they are standing. Not restored. Not healed. Just the knowledge that the man who took their daughter from that freeway shoulder in the dark will not be on any road, at any hour, looking for another chance. It is the smallest possible version of accountability. And for the family of Denise Huber, it is the only version they ever got.